I'm going to begin doing the intros so that our presenters can start on time. My name is Colleen Crotty. I'm with Ecology. I'm going to be just the moderator today. This is track 4, in case anyone is a little lost. We're doing illicit connections, illicit discharges, and identifying sources of stormwater pollution, the latest information on IDDE field screening and source tracing methods. So our presenters today are Jeanne Dorn and James Packman. Jeanne is a water quality planner at King County Stormwater Services. She has created and manages permit-required and other projects to screen for pollution sources. Projects include conveyance screening, fecal coliform total daily loads, or TMDLs, and shellfish harvest areas, pollution identification and correction, or PIC. She has successfully implemented new bacteria screening methods, including in-house testing for bacteria coupled with DNA lab tests to hone in on pollution types, including finding illicit sanitary sewer to stormwater conveyance connections and failing septic systems. And James Packman is a senior hydrologist at Aspect Consulting, LLC. His experience with IDDE includes environmental compliance programs for ports, cities, and counties, identifying and tracing sources of urban stormwater pollution, and a regional evaluation of IDDE and source control data from throughout Western Washington. Aspect Consulting is the lead consultant on the project presented here, which will update the ICID field manual and provide trainings on field methods for municipal stormwater staff. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Colleen, and thank you to the Washington Stormwater Center for doing such a fantastic job organizing this very beneficial conference. As Colleen said, my name is Jeanne Dorn. I'm with King County Stormwater Services, and King County, in conjunction with Aspects Consulting, is presenting this presentation today. And this project is a joint project between King County, Aspect Consulting, and also Herrera Environmental Consulting is working on this project too. And this project, should I go ahead? Maybe I should go ahead. Oh, well. This project is a part of the Stormwater Action Monitoring Program, which is hosted by Department of Ecology. And within Department of Ecology, let me go back. You'll see the little logo up in the upper right there. There's a little, I think that's an outfall pipe with a drop coming out of it. That's the source identification subcomponent within the Stormwater Action Monitoring Program. And Stormwater Action Monitoring Program, we just say SAM. And SAM's funding for this project has been provided by permittees from Western Washington. And what is the manual we're talking about? What the heck is ICID? ICID stands for illicit connections, illicit discharges, and the manual that we, King County working with Herrera under a grant from Department of Ecology back in 2012, 2013, made this manual to help municipalities comply with the State Department of Ecology's IDDE requirements. And of course, IDDE is another one of those lovely acronyms, which probably some of you know stands for illicit discharge detection and elimination. This manual, unfortunately, won't give you the magic bullet to eliminate problems once they've been found. The manual does not cover that. However, the manual is going to be very helpful for you as a single source reference you can pull information out of for finding problems. So screening for pollution problems and identifying them, honing in on them. The audience is people like you, municipalities who have to comply with the permit, and also in your hearts, you do care about water quality. Beyond just checking boxes, you want to make a difference. And yeah, you want to find pollution. So this will help you do that. And so again, the manual is just for finding illicit connections, illicit discharges. Sorry, we won't give you the magic formula for eliminating them. That's other programs. And why should we do this? Well, as I said, it's a good resource for all of us who are in this field. And as probably most of you know, there's new stormwater permits coming online. They'll be active this summer. So it coincides with the new permits issuance. And this work supports Department of Ecology's SAM program, and it also supports you. So thank you for coming. And now the rest of the presentation, James Packman of Aspect will present. And James is a senior hydrologist at Aspect. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jeanne. Can you guys hear me back there? All right, great. So as Jeanne said, Aspect Consulting and Herrera are supporting King County with updating the 2013 version of the ICID manual. That's intended to coincide with the reissuance of the stormwater permits taking effect this summer. In addition to updating the manual, there will also be a series of live hands-on trainings to convey the information in the manual as well as the updated information. So jumping right into the steps that we followed for obtaining feedback and input on what updates would be useful to include in the manual. These steps are captured by these four steps here. One was an online survey. The second one was feedback workshops. The third is to update the literature review that went into the original manual. And the fourth is queries of a regional database on illicit discharge detection and elimination. So the input we've received so far is from the online survey and from the feedback workshops. The next steps that we'll be undertaking, or completing, I should say, are to update the literature review and the queries of the regional database. So just jumping right into some of the updates and feedback we heard from the online survey. Just a few here that I'll comment in terms of updated information. One is to include the new and updated permit language for IDDE programs. Another is to prioritize the indicator test by effectiveness. And by indicator tests, I'm referring to the specific chemical tests that are used in the field or in the lab to identify what a substance is potentially. A third update we heard was to streamline some of the reference sheets that are in the manual. Now here's an example of a reference sheet, and I know it's pretty small print. The intent is not for you to be able to read it all, so I'm just going to try to walk through some of it here and illustrate what we mean by updating some of the reference sheets. What we have here at the top, let's see if this laser is going to show up, and not so much. What we have here at the top are two tracks for a decision-making chart. On the left, you have piped systems. On the right, you have ditch systems. And then it walks through the steps up at the top. Right below the top are the field screening steps. In the middle are the indicator chemical tests. And at the bottom are the source tracing tests to actually hone in on the source of the potential discharges. And an example, this is a good example for ways that we could provide an alternative to this decision chart and streamline it. Some of the feedback we heard at the feedback workshops and the survey was that sometimes you don't need to go through all these steps in a systematic order. If you're familiar with the area, you know that maybe there's some new construction happening or a new building was built, then you could be able to sort of jump to either a specific indicator test or just go right to the bottom of the chart and do source tracing if you have that information. So this is a good example of how we can update this information in the manual and provide a more streamlined approach. Moving on to additional information we heard from the survey results. Some of the new information that we were recommended and feedback we received was to add information on indicators, including DNA sampling, including E. coli bacteria, as well as tests for dissolved oxygen. We also heard feedback that although the NPDES stormwater permits themselves emphasize dry weather screening of things like outfalls, we heard that year-round screening can also be useful. In addition, it would be great to bring in some lessons learned from some existing programs that have had a lot of success. I know some of you are from some of those jurisdictions that have long-standing programs, and it would be great to hear some information from those programs and incorporate that into the manual update. Okay, so that's the summary of what we learned from the online survey. Moving on to the feedback workshops. Just briefly, we held 2 workshops in February and March of this year. They were to review current field methods in use, and those workshops were intended for municipal stormwater staff. So we were asking them, what are some of the current methods that you use for screening, for identifying and source tracing illicit discharges? We also asked if they use the 2013 ICID manual, or perhaps another one that maybe they've developed themselves or from another area. And we went through the 3 major sections of the manual to ask, have you used this methodology for field screening? Have you used this indicator test? Does it work? Give us some feedback on how you like it. So jumping into some of the results that we heard and feedback we heard, for the screening element, we had a recommendation to add discussion of allowable discharges. As many of you know, the municipal stormwater permits have a list of allowable discharges and conditionally allowable discharges that include things like fire response foam. And this is not to be confused with drills and practice sessions using fire foam. Fire foam is allowed in the MS4 and to be discharged to receiving waters when it is used for emergency response. So that's an important distinction, as well as things like including groundwater flow in piped and ditch systems and street and sidewalk wash water. Those are things that are allowable under certain conditions and important to be able to distinguish in the field when you're doing IDD investigations. Another screening element to add was to expand upon was the ditch inspection section, and also as part of screening just to identify whether or not a potential illicit discharge is present, to look at what active construction permits are active in the area. Also from the feedback workshops, some of the feedback we got for indicator testing was to add microbial DNA tests, to add caffeine tests, to add tests for cholesterol, as well as look at the results of aquatic macroinvertebrates, which are indicators themselves, add tests for petroleum hydrocarbons, as well as consider combinations of parameters. I'm just curious, how many people are familiar with the 2013 manual and maybe have looked through it or used it for their own programs? Okay, a few of you. So in there, you might have seen that one of the combinations of parameters that we included was an ammonia-potassium ratio. And it turns out that that particular ratio is not always so definitive and so helpful. So we're looking at other combinations of parameters that can indicate specific types of industrial waste, specific types of erosion. Over on the right side here, some of the expanded descriptions that we got feedback on was to include a discussion of the importance of looking at background levels when measuring things like hardness, turbidity, and fluoride. Also, the dye and smoke testing section, we heard that that is used, but it can be sometimes a little expensive and labor intensive. So there was a recommendation to expand the description of that section so that folks know what situations it's appropriate to use. Also to expand the descriptions of how odor is used and add some other things that might be occurring naturally or that field inspectors might encounter in the field. As well as visual assessment, we heard that sometimes people just look down in catch basins, shine a light down in a manhole. Well, that's a lot different than actually pulling a sample into a glass jar and looking at it under sunlight. Color can be a little subjective, so you want to make it as objective as possible. Also, a few parameters we heard aren't used so much, as I mentioned, the ammonia, potassium, as well as sandbagging. So those would be reduced in their priority in the manual. Moving on to the source tracing part of the manual, some of the feedback we received was to add or update something like a homeowner or property owner questionnaire, adding the use of infrared thermography to detect municipal or industrial sources of discharge, adding canine source tracing. Who here has heard of canine source tracing? Who here has used canine source tracing? A few, right. So it's a relatively new technology, yes, and it is what it sounds like. It's where dogs, with their excellent sniffing ability and smelling ability, can actually smell things and distinguish between specific chemicals, for example, PCBs. As well as another update we heard feedback on would be great to update some of the equipment costs that are in the appendix of the manual. Over on the right, the expanded descriptions that we heard feedback on would be including private property access, coordinating with neighboring jurisdictions as sometimes drainage areas overlap, as well as I mentioned, expanding the description for dye and smoke testing, and also looking at soil conditions that may be affecting what you see in the field. Okay, so that takes us through the results, and we just have a few slides to tell you about the next steps of the project. Those next steps, as I mentioned at the beginning, included an updated literature review, a review of a 2014 region-wide IDDE database, as well as having the information vetted by the SAM program itself. As Jeanne mentioned, the SAM program has several components, one of which is the source identification component. So the source ID subgroup is part of the project to review our recommendations and improve them moving forward. The updated manual is scheduled to be published in late 2013. and it will be published at least in 2 places that we know of, one on Ecology's website for the SAM program, and also on the Washington Stormwater Center's website. All right, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be doing some trainings on the manual itself, including the updated information. Those trainings are planned to be throughout Western Washington. We have 8 of them scoped, so a lot of them. And that's a great opportunity to add to the trainings that Herrera and King County Washington Stormwater Center did after the original publication of the 2013 manual, which oftentimes had sold-out audiences. Those trainings are slated for winter 2019-2020. And in addition, there are some existing videos of those trainings on the Washington Stormwater's website here, Washington Stormwater Center's website. We've got the link on here on the bottom. Hopefully, I think the conference will provide the presentation so you can get the link to that. But if you just navigate to the Washington Stormwater Center website, I'm sure you can find it as well. There are 14 current videos from the previous trainings. This current project, we're going to make and add 6 new videos to that collection, just to bolster the information that is out there, so that if you're unable to attend one of the live trainings, or just need a refresher, or just need information on one specific method, you can go to the video and get that information. All right, that brings us to the end of our presentation. Short presentation. We're glad to take some questions. We have our contact information up there, but that's what we have. Thank you very much.